The $127 million lottery ticket was still warm in my pocket when I found my wife pressed against another man's chest in her corner office overlooking Baltimore Harbor. His hands rested on her waist with the kind of comfort that only comes from repetition. Her fingers touched his collar with familiar intimacy, and in that single frozen moment, while 200 white peonies slipped from my hands and scattered across imported marble flooring, I understood something terrible. Betrayal doesn't announce itself with thunder. It whispers. It hides behind late meetings and unanswered text messages, and the gradual emotional distance you convince yourself is just normal marriage fatigue. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that betrayal felt physically impossible? Have you ever built your entire identity around loving another person, only to discover they'd been performing affection while planning their exit? I'm asking because what happened to me that Sunday afternoon wasn't just about catching my wife with another man. It was about realizing that the life I thought we'd built together was a carefully maintained illusion, and I'd been the only one who didn't know it was fake. I thought I was rushing to give my wife the surprise of a lifetime. Instead, I discovered she'd been living a secret life for 14 months. 14 months of systematic deception while I worked overnight shifts and apologized for not being successful enough, and believed her when she said she loved me exactly as I was. But here's what nobody tells you about discovering betrayal on the same day you become a millionaire. Sometimes the worst timing is actually perfect timing. Sometimes fate gives you clarity disguised as disaster. Sometimes losing everything reveals that you never really had it in the first place. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, or if you're about to hear the craziest twist of fate you've encountered all week, hit that subscribe button, because this story gets darker before it gets better. But I promise you, the ending will change how you think about loyalty, love, and what it really means to be enough. Let me take you back to where this all started. 37 hours before my marriage ended. I'd been awake since Friday morning, moving through the kind of exhaustion that makes reality feel slightly unreal, like you're watching your own life happen to someone else. I taught 3 back-to-back photography classes at Baltimore Community College, barely staying ahead of students who asked questions I'd answered 1,000 times before. Then I drove 40 minutes north to Towson to photograph a wedding for a couple I'd never met, smiling professionally while my feet bled inside dress shoes I couldn't afford to replace. After the wedding, I drove straight to the gallery opening on North Avenue. My photographs were being displayed alongside established artists for the first time in my career. 6 images I'd spent 2 years perfecting, capturing Baltimore's forgotten architecture in ways that made people stop and actually see the beauty they walked past every day. Margot, the gallery owner, had called it a breakthrough. Critics used words like haunting and necessary. But Vivienne didn't come. She'd texted around 7 that evening saying she was buried under grant proposals at the Meridian Foundation, that she was so sorry, that she'd make it up to me next week. I'd stood there beneath my own photographs, accepting congratulations from strangers, while my wife chose paperwork over the most important professional moment of my life. And I'd told myself it was fine, that her work mattered, that I was being selfish for wanting her there. That's what you do when you love someone who's slowly stopped loving you back. You make excuses. You minimize your own needs. You become smaller and smaller until you barely recognize yourself anymore. By the time the gallery closed at midnight, I'd been running on coffee and adrenaline for so long that my hands shook when I tried removing the lighting equipment. Margot had to physically stop me from continuing, her silver bracelets chiming as she grabbed my wrist. "Go home, Jonas," she'd said, exhaustion softening her usually sharp voice. "You look half dead." She wasn't wrong. I caught my reflection in the gallery windows on my way out. 34 years old, but looking older. Dark circles under my eyes. Rumpled button-down shirt I'd been wearing for 2 days. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix because it comes from disappointment rather than physical exhaustion. I drove through Baltimore's empty streets, watching traffic lights blink yellow against wet pavement. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the city smelling like metal and possibility. My ancient Volvo complained audibly whenever I accelerated, a grinding noise I'd been ignoring for 6 months because repair costs terrified me more than mechanical failure. Teaching paid barely enough to cover rent. Wedding photography supplemented inconsistently. Gallery sales happened so rarely that I'd learned to stop hoping. Meanwhile, Vivienne worked at the Meridian Foundation, managing development for a nonprofit that paid her enough to cover the lifestyle gap between us. She never said it directly, but I felt it constantly. the awareness that I wasn't successful enough, that my artistic integrity was really just expensive pride, that I'd promised her a creative life together but delivered struggle instead. We'd met 9 years earlier at a museum fundraiser I'd been hired to photograph. She'd corrected my pronunciation of a Dutch painter's name, and instead of feeling embarrassed, I'd felt charmed. Her confidence seemed generous then, like she wanted to share knowledge rather than display superiority. 3 months later, we were inseparable. She'd come to every gallery showing, no matter how small. She'd stay up late while I edited photographs, bringing me coffee and asking questions about composition and light. She made me feel like my work mattered, like I mattered. 2 years after we met, I proposed beside the Chesapeake Bay during autumn sunset, offering her a ring I'd saved a year to afford. She'd cried when she said yes. Real tears that I thought meant she understood choosing me meant choosing uncertainty, choosing art over money, choosing love over security. We married at her family's estate in Annapolis, beneath imported orchids and a string quartet that cost more than my annual salary. Her mother cried throughout the ceremony, and at the time I'd thought they were happy tears. Looking back now, I realize they might have been something else entirely. Her family tolerated me the way wealthy people tolerate artistic choices, with polite confusion and quiet concern. Her father once asked what my 5-year plan was, and when I'd explained my vision for gallery representation and teaching, he'd nodded slowly before changing the subject to someone else's son who worked in finance. Vivienne had squeezed my hand under the table, told me later not to worry about her father, that she loved my authenticity, my groundedness, my refusal to compromise artistic vision for commercial success. But over the years, something shifted. She stopped coming to gallery showings, stopped asking about my photographs, started making comments about friends who'd bought houses, taken vacations to Italy, joined country clubs in Bethesda. I should have paid attention to those comments. I should have recognized them as warnings. But when you love someone completely, you convince yourself that love is enough, that eventually they'll remember why they chose you. That temporary distance is just stress or fatigue or normal relationship evolution. You don't realize you're drowning until you're already underwater. At the convenience store on Monument Street, I stopped for coffee around 2 in the morning. The fluorescent lights inside felt aggressive after the gallery's carefully curated darkness. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Huang, an elderly Korean woman who'd worked there every night for the 12 years I'd lived in the neighborhood. She studied my face with the concerned expression she reserved for obviously suffering customers. "You look terrible," she announced, pouring coffee without asking if I wanted any. "When did you last sleep?" "Thursday, I think." "What day is today?" "Saturday. Maybe Sunday now." She shook her head disapprovingly, then gestured toward the lottery ticket display with one weathered hand. "Buy one. You need luck more than sleep." I almost refused. My father had been a compulsive gambler who destroyed our family's finances before I turned 10. I'd watched him chase losses until we lost our house, our car, our stability. I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding his mistakes, building a careful existence where every dollar had predetermined purpose. Lottery tickets represented chaos, the mathematical exploitation of desperate hope, everything I taught myself to resist. But something in Mrs. Huang's expression stopped me. Not pity exactly, more like recognition, as if she understood that sometimes exhaustion erases the difference between wisdom and superstition. "One ticket," I said quietly. She selected it personally, handling the paper like it contained actual magic. "Number 47, she said. That's how old my daughter was when her life changed completely. "Good number." I paid, folded the ticket into my wallet behind a photograph of Vivienne from our wedding day, and forgot about it immediately. By the time I reached my apartment in Fells Point, my mind had already moved toward tomorrow's problems. Grades to submit, a potential gallery commission, the increasingly aggressive voicemails from my mother asking why I never called anymore. I fell asleep on the couch still wearing my gallery clothes, too exhausted to make it to the bedroom. Sunday morning arrived violently, my phone alarm screaming at 7, reminding me I'd promised to photograph a charity brunch in Towson. I showered quickly, swallowed coffee cold from yesterday's pot, and drove north through Baltimore's Sunday empty streets. The brunch lasted 4 hours. Rich people eating expensive eggs while discussing poverty relief. I photographed them dutifully, capturing their charitable expressions, their designer concern, their tax-deductible generosity. Nobody looked at me directly. Photographers exist in peripheral vision, necessary but invisible. Afterward, I sat in my car overlooking Loch Raven Reservoir, too exhausted to drive home immediately. Sunlight reflected off dark water in patterns that would have made beautiful photographs if I'd had energy to care. My phone displayed 17 unread messages, mostly from students asking about grades. One from Margot about potential gallery representation. One from my mother asking why I never called anymore. Nothing from Vivian. That absence should have warned me. We'd been married 9 years. She always texted during long shoots, asking about my day, sharing small observations, maintaining the performance of connection. Silence meant something, but I was too tired to interpret omens correctly. Instead, I remembered the lottery ticket, pulled out my wallet, found the crumpled paper still folded exactly where Mrs. Huang had placed it, tucked behind Vivian's wedding photograph. I opened the state lottery application more from boredom than expectation, scanning the numbers while half listening to NPR discuss economic recovery. The loading wheel spun and spun and spun. Then the screen flashed gold. Jackpot winner, $127 million. My first reaction was laughter, the kind that sounds like choking. Obviously, the application had malfunctioned. Obviously, this was a glitch, a mistake, a cosmic clerical error that would be corrected within seconds. I scanned the ticket again. Same result. Again, same result. The numbers aligned perfectly, impossibly, transforming my entire existence in the space between heartbeats. 4, 15, 23, 32, 47, Powerball 12. 6 numbers that changed everything. The world outside my car continued normally. Joggers circled the reservoir in expensive athletic wear. Dogs chased tennis balls across groomed grass. Families walked slowly toward brunch restaurants, their biggest concern whether to order pancakes or waffles. But I couldn't hear any of it anymore. Sound became muffled, distant, as if reality had separated itself into 2 distinct layers. The normal universe everyone else inhabited, and this new terrifying dimension where I'd just won $127 million. My hands started trembling so violently that the phone nearly slipped onto the floorboard. I gripped the steering wheel instead, knuckles white, trying to anchor myself to something solid while my brain attempted processing the impossible. Now, before I tell you what I did next, and trust me, you won't believe how fast this perfect moment turned into a nightmare, do me a favor. Drop a comment telling me what you would do with $127 million. Would you tell anyone? Would you stay silent? Would you immediately start planning how to share it? Keep watching, because my choice changed everything. I drove back to Monument Street immediately, barely remembering the actual drive. Somehow my body knew how to operate the car, while my conscious mind remained frozen in shock. Mrs. Huang was restocking cigarettes when I walked in. She took one look at my face and stopped immediately. "You won," she said simply, not a question, a statement. I handed her the ticket with shaking hands. She examined it carefully, then checked the numbers on her computer screen. Twice, 3 times. Then she looked directly into my eyes with an expression I'll never forget. "Lock your doors," she whispered. "Trust nobody." Those 4 words should have prepared me for everything that followed. But when you're standing in a fluorescent-lit convenience store holding a winning lottery ticket, your brain doesn't process warnings correctly. You're too busy imagining all the ways your life is about to improve. You don't realize that sudden wealth doesn't solve problems. It reveals them. By 2 in the afternoon, I'd been transferred into a private financial office in downtown Baltimore, surrounded by lawyers, advisors, and security personnel who appeared seemingly from nowhere. They discussed tax structures, anonymity protocols, investment portfolios, generational wealth management, and risk assessment with the clinical efficiency of surgeons. I nodded mechanically while understanding nothing. My thoughts stayed focused entirely on Vivian. She'd been working late frequently. Campaign strategy meetings for the nonprofit, she'd always explained. Important work, meaningful work, work that mattered more than my little photography projects. But now, everything had changed. Now I could surprise her, give her something impossible, something that proved I wasn't just the struggling artist she'd married out of charitable attraction. I wanted a memory, something cinematic, something she'd tell our grandchildren about someday. After leaving the financial office, I visited Brennan and Sterling, the most exclusive jewelry boutique in Baltimore. 6 months earlier, Vivienne had paused outside their window display, staring at a vintage Cartier bracelet with the expression people reserve for religious artifacts. "Some women would kill for this," she'd whispered. I'd memorized that tone, hungry, yearning, almost painful. So, I bought the bracelet immediately. The jeweler wrapped it in midnight blue velvet, while asking if there was a special occasion. "My wife deserves extraordinary things," I answered. He smiled professionally. But now I wonder how many men before me said identical words while standing at the edge of disaster. Next, I ordered 200 white peonies, Vivienne's favorite flower. She'd once told me white represented purity surviving inside corrupt environments. At the time, the statement sounded poetic. Years later, I finally understood its real meaning. White also hides stains well. Around 4 in the afternoon, I contacted a luxury automotive service specializing in discreet deliveries. They transported a silver Maserati Quattraport directly to the Meridian Foundation headquarters in Harbor East, where Vivienne's office occupied the entire 7th floor. I stood beside the vehicle wearing my only good suit, navy, slightly wrinkled, purchased 7 years ago for gallery openings I'd imagined would happen more frequently. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the building's glass exterior, turning the entire structure into a mirror of sky and water. People walked past, some glancing at the Maserati with appreciation, others ignoring it completely. A few pulled out phones to photograph the luxury vehicle parked conspicuously outside a non-profit headquarters. For one perfect moment, I believed life had finally aligned correctly. Money, marriage, success, validation, everything I'd worked towards suddenly felt possible. Then I noticed something wrong. The lobby reception desk was empty. Unusual for a Sunday, but not impossible. Non-profit work often demanded irregular hours. I'd heard Vivienne explain this countless times, her voice patient whenever I questioned why she needed to work weekends. I carried the flowers and jewelry box toward the elevator, my reflection fragmenting across chrome and marble surfaces. The building smelled like expensive cleaning products and filtered air, everything designed to communicate importance, permanence, institutional authority. The elevator doors opened smoothly. I pressed 7, watched the numbers illuminate sequentially as I ascended toward my wife's office. The 7th floor was silent, too silent. None of the usual office sounds, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, distant conversation. Just profound, deliberate quiet that made my footsteps sound aggressive against polished flooring. Then I heard Vivienne's voice, soft, intimate, coming from the corner office overlooking the harbor. "He still thinks I'm impressed by his gallery showings," she said quietly. "Like critical acclaim pays mortgages." I stopped walking. The flowers suddenly felt heavy in my hands. A man's voice answered, deeper, confident, amused. "After tonight, you won't need to pretend anymore." Silence followed, then kissing sounds, slow, comfortable, experienced, not nervous, not guilty, comfortable. And that single detail destroyed me more than anything else, because comfort means repetition. Comfort means history. Comfort means the betrayal didn't begin that afternoon. My brain tried protecting me. For exactly 3.5 seconds, it invented alternative explanations. Maybe she was comforting a colleague. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe this was some kind of role-playing exercise for donor cultivation training. Then I heard her laugh, the same laugh she used to make only for me. Before it became something she performed for other people at fundraisers and strategy meetings and apparently in private offices with men who weren't her husband. I pushed the door open slowly. Vivienne stood pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, wrapped in the arms of Marcus Ashford, the Meridian Foundation's board president, a venture capitalist she'd previously described as professionally necessary but personally tedious, someone she had to tolerate for funding purposes. His hands rested confidently around her waist. Her fingers touched his chest with practiced intimacy. They were framed by the harbor view behind them, sunlight making them look like figures in a painting. Neither noticed me immediately. That gave me enough time to see the truth clearly. Her head tilted against his shoulder, his mouth near her temple. Their bodies aligned with the kind of comfort that only develops through consistent contact. No confusion, no misunderstanding, just reality. The peonies slipped from my hands first. 200 white flowers scattering across imported hardwood flooring like snow. Then, the jewelry box, midnight blue velvet, hitting wood with a sound that echoed across the empty office like a gunshot. Vivian looked up instantly. Her eyes went wide. Color drained from her face so quickly I watched it happen in real time. Her expression wasn't sadness or regret. It was fear. Pure fear. The fear of someone whose performance collapsed before the audience disappeared. Marcus released her waist immediately, stepping back with the kind of automatic guilt that confirmed this wasn't their first time. His confidence evaporated so quickly, it almost looked pathetic. Powerful men become children when caught. "Jonas," Vivian whispered, stepping forward carefully. "This isn't what you think." Fascinating sentence. Nobody lies faster than a person caught before they've finished preparing their story. She took another careful step toward me, hands slightly raised like I was a dangerous animal, requiring slow movements. Behind her, Marcus remained frozen beside the window, adjusting his tie like fabric could somehow restore dignity. I stared at Vivian without blinking. 9 years together suddenly replayed through my mind differently, as if betrayal had rewritten every memory retroactively. Late strategy meetings that ran past midnight, weekend conferences in Philadelphia and Washington, girls' trips to Miami and Charleston, private phone calls she always took on the balcony. Her gradual emotional distance I'd convinced myself was normal marriage evolution. Tiny details became evidence once the illusion disappeared. "Jonas," she whispered again, voice shaking. "Please let me explain." Interesting word. Explain. Human beings use explanations when they believe reality sounds too ugly to survive by itself. Marcus finally cleared his throat, stepping forward with manufactured confidence. "This situation looks inappropriate, but I think we should discuss this privately." I almost laughed. The arrogance fascinated me. He'd been sleeping with another man's wife, inside an office funded by charitable donations, yet he still spoke like an executive controlling a board meeting. I looked directly at him for the first time. Marcus Ashford was the type of man magazines described as influential, late 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, charcoal suit tailored precisely to his frame, perfect posture, controlled voice, expensive watch catching light from the harbor view. Men like Marcus survive by understanding appearances better than morality. They knew confidence intimidated people long enough to avoid consequences. "You should remove your hand from her," I said quietly. He wasn't touching her anymore, but the implication was clear. "Stop pretending you have any authority here." Marcus immediately stepped further away from Vivian, creating visible distance between them. That detail mattered. Strong men challenge other men. Cowards calculate risks. And Marcus Ashford had already realized the situation was becoming dangerous. Vivian suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Please," she whispered desperately. "You're misunderstanding this." Another fascinating sentence, because no honest person says you're misunderstanding while standing inches away from another man's mouth with kiss-swollen lips and guilty eyes. I slowly looked down at her hand, touching me. Her wedding ring caught afternoon light. White gold, emerald-cut diamond, custom designed in Annapolis. I'd spent a year saving for it, before proposing beside the Chesapeake Bay during autumn sunset. At the time, I believed sacrifice strengthened love, that choosing an expensive ring proved commitment, that physical symbols mattered. Now I realized sacrifice only impresses people capable of appreciating loyalty. I removed her hand carefully from my wrist, gently but firmly, the same way you'd remove a stranger's touch. That movement hurt her more than shouting ever could. I saw it in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to yell or break down or give her the emotional reaction she could manipulate into forgiveness. For years, physical affection had been our language. Forehead kisses before work, fingers touching during dinners, hands resting together during flights. We'd been the couple people envied publicly, the artistic husband and his sophisticated wife, the passionate love story. Yet standing inside that Harbor View office, I realized something terrifying. Some couples perform intimacy so professionally that audiences confuse consistency with sincerity. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. Unknown number. I answered automatically without breaking eye contact with either of them. "Mr. Carver?" A professional female voice said. "This is Rebecca Steinman from Maryland Lottery Financial Services." We've finalized the first transfer authorization for your winnings. Congratulations again on the $127 million. We'll need you to come in tomorrow morning to complete the remaining paperwork." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The office became a photograph. Vivian, frozen mid-step. Marcus's hands suspended near his tie. White peonies scattered across dark wood. Harbor view behind them, turning orange with approaching sunset. Vivian's face drained completely. Whatever color had returned after initial shock disappeared again, leaving her looking almost translucent. Marcus stared directly at me, his expression cycling through confusion, then understanding, then something approaching horror. And suddenly, I understood something important. The affair hurt, but the timing transformed betrayal into humiliation, because fate had allowed them to reveal themselves before I'd touched a single dollar of lottery money, before I'd changed bank accounts, or bought houses, or altered my life in any visible way. They'd shown me exactly who they were, while thinking I was still the struggling photographer who couldn't afford car repairs. And honestly, that might have saved my life. I need you to pause for just a second. If this story is hitting you emotionally, if you're feeling that chest-tightening anger or heartbreak, hit that like button. And if you want to know how a man handles finding out his wife's been lying for over a year on the same day he wins $127 million, keep watching, because what I did next shocked everyone. I ended the call slowly while the office remained silent. Vivian looked at me differently after hearing the number, not lovingly, not regretfully, strategically. Her eyes calculated. I watched it happen, watched her brain shift from panic mode into assessment mode, watched her measure my new net worth against whatever future she'd been planning with Marcus. That expression hurt more than the cheating itself, because it confirmed my deepest fear. She was already recalculating. Some people process heartbreak emotionally. Others process opportunity mathematically. And my wife had always been exceptional with numbers. Marcus stepped further away from her, no longer maintaining even the pretense of solidarity. Before the phone call, he'd been defending their relationship. Now he understood he'd accidentally betrayed a man who'd just become wealthier than everyone in the building combined. "Jonas," Vivian whispered carefully, her voice taking on a softer quality. "Can we please go home and talk privately?" Home. Interesting word choice, because 20 minutes earlier she'd been pressed against another man inside a corporate office without worrying about privacy at all. I stared at her silently, studied the face I'd woken up beside for 9 years, tried to find evidence of the woman I'd married, the one who'd stayed up late while I edited photographs, who'd brought me coffee and asked questions about composition and light, who'd cried when I proposed and promised to choose uncertainty together. But that woman had disappeared gradually, so slowly I hadn't noticed, replaced by someone who measured love in currency and evaluated relationships like investment portfolios. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, attempting to regain authority. "I think everybody here is emotionally overwhelmed. This conversation should continue elsewhere, perhaps with mediators present who can help facilitate productive dialogue." I almost laughed. Corporates speak during a catastrophe. Men like Marcus couldn't help themselves. They'd been trained to control rooms through language, to transform disasters into manageable situations through vocabulary. Nobody moved, because authority only works when people still respect you, and respect disappears instantly once hypocrisy becomes public. I slowly bent down and picked up the jewelry box from the hardwood floor. Midnight blue velvet, slightly dusty now from landing. The white peonies remained scattered beside my shoes like evidence from a crime scene. Vivian watched me carefully, probably hoping the gesture meant reconciliation, that I was retrieving her gift, that somehow this situation could still transform into the romantic surprise I'd planned. Instead, I walked directly toward Marcus. The office became completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the building's ventilation system seemed to stop. Marcus straightened instinctively as I stopped inches away from him. Up close, he smelled like expensive cologne and stress. His jaw tightened. His eyes tracked my hands. Then I held out the jewelry box toward him. Confusion crossed his face. "What is this?" I smiled without warmth. "Since you were enjoying my wife already, you might as well finance her too." I heard Vivian gasp behind me. Soft, shocked, genuinely horrified. Marcus didn't touch the box. Didn't move at all. Because accepting jewelry from another man during an affair might have become the most humiliating photograph of his career. And Marcus Ashford lived and died by photographs, by appearances, by the carefully constructed image of respectability that allowed venture capitalists to pretend they cared about charitable work. "You're angry," Vivian whispered desperately. "You're saying things you don't mean. Please, Jonas, this isn't you." That sentence almost made me laugh. This isn't you. As if she had any idea who I actually was anymore. As if 9 years of marriage had given her insight into my character rather than just access to my presence. People love calling honesty anger once truth becomes uncomfortable. I looked directly at her wedding ring again, white gold catching harbor light. The same ring I'd placed on her finger 9 years ago while promising to love her through poverty and success, sickness and health. All the traditional vows we'd recited without understanding their weight. Vivian slowly removed the ring from her finger, not dramatically, carefully, as if she feared sudden movements might destroy whatever chance still existed. She held it toward me with shaking hands. "I made mistakes," she whispered, "but I love you." The oldest emergency sentence in human history. I love you. Fascinating phrase. People use it before betrayal, during betrayal, after betrayal. Some even use it while destroying someone completely. I stared at the ring in her hand without touching it. Then I asked the question that truly mattered. "When were you going to tell me?" Silence. Her eyes shifted away instantly, looked toward the window, the floor, anywhere except my face. And that hesitation answered everything. Because honest people answer painful questions immediately. Liars search for safe versions first. Marcus suddenly interrupted, stepping forward with renewed confidence. "Jonas, this situation became complicated long before today. Nobody intended to hurt you. These things happen in marriages. People grow apart. Needs change." Vivian felt neglected. "You were always working, always prioritizing photography over her emotional requirements." I looked at him slowly, let his words settle into the air between us. He'd just weaponized private information, details about my marriage that Vivian must have shared with him during intimate conversations. Probably while lying in bed together, probably while laughing about my artistic integrity and financial failures. That realization hurt differently than the affair itself. Affairs are terrible, but shared intimacy about your suffering, watching them turn your private pain into pillow talk, that's a violation that cuts deeper. Over what? I interrupted quietly. Marcus blinked. What? You said I prioritized photography over her needs. Over what specifically? He cleared his throat. Over her emotional well-being. Over building financial security together. Over planning a future that included stability rather than constant artistic struggle. I nodded slowly. How long have you two been discussing my failures? Jonas, Vivian started, but I held up one hand. She stopped immediately. How long? I asked again, still looking at Marcus. He hesitated, then decided honesty might be his best strategy. Several months. Vivian needed someone to talk to, someone who understood the pressure of balancing passion with practicality. Several months. They'd been analyzing my inadequacies for several months. How long have you been sleeping with my wife? I asked calmly. Marcus's jaw tightened. That's not relevant. How long? Vivian answered instead, her voice barely above a whisper. 14 months. The number landed like physical violence. 14 months. More than a year of systematic deception. I turned back to face her slowly. 14 months. That means every anniversary dinner, every gallery opening, every quiet evening I apologized for working late. All of it happened while you maintained a separate relationship with calculated precision. She didn't deny it, didn't try explaining, just stood there, holding her wedding ring, tears finally starting to fall. Real tears this time, born from genuine loss rather than tactical emotion. Were you ever going to tell me? I asked. This time she answered honestly. I don't know. That confession hurt worse than the affair itself, because uncertainty means she'd been waiting, evaluating options, measuring outcomes, determining which future offered superior advantages. I was never her husband. I was a provisional arrangement. Marcus cleared his throat again. Perhaps we should take a break from this conversation. Allow everyone to calm down. Make rational decisions without emotional volatility, clouding judgment. I smiled coldly. Are you worried, Marcus? About what? About how this looks? Board president of a charitable foundation conducting an affair with an employee's wife inside donor-funded office space. How do you think your investors will react when this becomes public? His expression hardened. You wouldn't. I wouldn't what? Tell the truth? Why not? You two certainly didn't have any problem with deception. That's different, he said carefully. That was private. This is professional. Private. Interesting word choice for a relationship you conducted inside your office. Vivian's phone suddenly buzzed. She glanced at the screen instinctively, and her entire face changed. Someone had posted about the Maserati downstairs. Social media moved faster than human emotion. The post already had thousands of views, hundreds of comments speculating about the lottery winner surprising his wife at work. Oh God, Vivian whispered. Marcus looked at her phone, then at me, finally understanding the scope of disaster. This wasn't just personal humiliation anymore. This was public spectacle. His carefully constructed image, her professional reputation, all of it was about to become content for strangers to consume and judge. I picked up the scattered peonies slowly, gathering them against my chest even though they were damaged now. Petals crushed, stems broken, still beautiful somehow despite being destroyed. Kind of like trust, I thought. Once broken, it never looks the same again. I'm keeping the car, I said quietly. And the money, and whatever dignity you left me. Vivian's eyes filled with fresh tears, real ones, born from genuine loss rather than strategic emotion. Jonas, please, we can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever you need. I looked at her for a long moment, studied the desperation in her face, the calculation still visible beneath panic. Then I asked one final question. Did you love him? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No sound emerged. Did you love me? I asked instead. She started crying harder. Yes, I did. I do. I got confused. I made mistakes. I'm so sorry. But her eyes told a different story. They kept darting toward Marcus, toward her phone, calculating damage, measuring consequences, and I realized something important. She wasn't sorry about the affair. She was sorry about getting caught. Before I tell you what happened in the months after, the divorce, the legal battles, and the unexpected way this story ends, I need you to do something. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who stayed in a relationship longer than they should have. Someone who's questioning their worth. Hit that share button. And subscribe, because the ending might surprise you. I walked toward the elevator slowly, carrying dead flowers through the empty office. Behind me, I heard Vivian crying, soft, desperate sounds that might have moved me yesterday. But heartbreak doesn't happen instantly. It accumulates slowly, imperceptibly, until one final betrayal forces you to acknowledge the truth you've been avoiding for years. Our marriage had been dying long before that afternoon. I'd simply been too faithful to notice. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, watching Vivian's reflection fragment across the closing chrome panels. Her face distorted, her tears magnified, her expensive clothes suddenly looking like a costume. The lobby was empty when I reached ground floor. The Maserati sat outside exactly where I'd left it, surrounded now by curious pedestrians recording videos through their phones. I climbed inside, started the engine, and drove away slowly. Behind me, the Meridian Foundation building grew smaller in my rearview mirror. Glass and steel and beautiful architecture concealing the same human disasters that existed everywhere else. Money doesn't prevent suffering, I realized. It just provides expensive locations for heartbreak. 3 months later, I sat in my new apartment, overlooking the inner harbor, watching sailboats move slowly across dark water. The space was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, hardwood floors, the kind of architectural luxury I'd once believed only existed for other people. But it felt empty. Wealth, I'd discovered, doesn't fill voids. It just makes them more comfortable. The divorce finalized quickly. Vivian's lawyers attempted arguing for extended alimony based on lifestyle expectations established during marriage. My lawyers countered with documented evidence of adultery. Maryland's fault-based divorce laws suddenly worked in my favor. She received nothing beyond what she'd entered the marriage with, which, given her family's wealth, was substantial enough. Marcus Ashford resigned from the Meridian Foundation after the affair became public knowledge, not because the board demanded it, but because donor confidence collapsed immediately. Wealthy people tolerate many moral failures, but public embarrassment threatens fundraising. Last I heard, he'd moved to Seattle, started consulting, married someone age-appropriate. Vivian sent one letter 3 weeks after the divorce finalized. Handwritten on expensive stationery, it arrived at my new address somehow. She'd always been resourceful. "Jonas," it began, "I know apologies sound inadequate now. I know I destroyed something irreplaceable, but I need you to understand. I never stopped caring about you. I just stopped knowing how to be the person you needed. You deserved better. You deserved honesty. You deserved someone who loved your art as much as you did. I hope the money brings you happiness. I hope you find someone worthy of your loyalty. I hope someday you might forgive me." It was signed, simply, with the letter 5th. I read the letter once, then burned it in the kitchen sink, watching expensive paper curl into ash. Forgiveness wasn't impossible, but it required proximity I no longer possessed. She'd become a stranger, someone I'd once loved completely, now transformed into a cautionary memory. Mrs. Huang still works at the Monument Street convenience store. I visit every Sunday morning, buying coffee and lottery tickets I never intend to use. She never asks about the money, never mentions the news coverage, just pours coffee and makes small observations about weather, traffic, the incremental changes that define ordinary existence. Last week, she gestured toward a young woman standing near the magazine rack, early 30s, wearing paint-stained jeans, carrying a portfolio case covered in gallery stickers. "You should talk to her," Mrs. Huang whispered. "She looks like someone who understands beautiful things." I smiled. "I'm not ready." "Nobody's ever ready," she said quietly. "That's what makes it meaningful." Maybe she was right. Maybe readiness is a myth people hide behind to avoid vulnerability. But standing in that fluorescent-lit convenience store, drinking bad coffee while watching a stranger browse photography magazines, I felt something unexpected. Not hope exactly, not healing, just possibility. The quiet awareness that devastation doesn't last forever, that eventually pain transforms into wisdom, that someday I might trust someone enough to risk everything again. Here's what nobody tells you about betrayal and sudden wealth happening simultaneously. The money doesn't heal the heartbreak, but it does provide resources for recovery that most people don't have access to. I could afford therapy, good therapy, the kind where professionals help you understand that your worth isn't determined by someone else's capacity to recognize it. I could afford time to not work, time to process, time to rebuild myself without the pressure of survival forcing premature healing. I could afford distance. I sold everything that reminded me of Vivian and started fresh. New apartment, new furniture, new city even, for a while. Put physical space between myself and the memories until they lost their power. But most importantly, the timing taught me something invaluable, because I didn't win the lottery first, because the betrayal happened before the money arrived. I got to see exactly who stayed when I had nothing, and the answer was nobody. If I'd won the lottery first, I might never have known whether Vivian stayed for love or money. Fate gave me clarity disguised as disaster. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually rescues we didn't know we needed. Vivian's betrayal saved me from wasting another decade inside a performance disguised as marriage. It freed me to discover what I actually valued once survival pressure disappeared. And I learned something surprising. I didn't want a bigger house or luxury cars or exotic vacations. I wanted time. Time to make art without apologizing. Time to teach students who actually cared about learning. Time to exist without constantly proving my worth to people who'd already decided I wasn't enough. The lottery didn't change my life. The betrayal did. The money just funded my recovery. I thought I needed $127 million to feel worthy. Turns out, I just needed to stop giving my worth to someone who didn't value it. Let me tell you about the real lesson here. The one that took me months to understand. For years, I'd believed love required sacrifice. That proving devotion meant making yourself smaller. That real partnership involved one person compromising constantly, while the other accepted sacrifices as their due. But that's not love. That's performance. That's one person auditioning endlessly for a role they've already been cast in. while the other person waits for someone better to come along. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself. It doesn't demand you apologize for your passion, or hide your struggles, or pretend your dreams matter less than someone else's comfort. Real love sees you completely, challenges you, certainly, but values you consistently. Vivian never valued me. She valued what I represented. The artistic husband, who made her seem cultured. The struggling photographer, who made her success look more impressive by comparison. The loyal partner who wouldn't question her increasingly frequent absences. I was a prop in her life story. And the moment a wealthier, more successful prop appeared, she started planning her exit. But here's the thing about being treated like you're disposable. Eventually, you start believing it. You internalize the message that you're not enough, that your worth depends on external validation, that love is something you have to earn rather than something freely given. And that belief destroys you more effectively than any betrayal ever could. The real gift of that horrible Sunday afternoon wasn't the lottery money. It was the forced confrontation with truth, the undeniable evidence that the person I'd built my entire identity around loving had been systematically deceiving me for over a year. I couldn't make excuses anymore, couldn't convince myself things would improve, couldn't minimize my own needs in service of keeping peace. I had to face reality. And reality, as brutal as it was, set me free. Standing in my apartment now, looking out at the harbor while morning light turns the water gold, I feel grateful. Not happy exactly, not healed completely, but genuinely grateful. Because Vivian's betrayal, as devastating as it was, revealed the truth before I wasted another decade inside a performance disguised as marriage. Some relationships look perfect externally, while dying internally. They maintain the appearance of intimacy through routine and habit and the momentum of years invested. But underneath, they're hollow, empty performances sustained by fear of change more than genuine connection. I'd been living inside that hollowness for years without recognizing it, convincing myself that emotional distance was normal, that passion fades naturally, that marriage meant accepting less than what you actually needed. But that's not marriage. That's surrender. That's slow-motion grief disguised as maturity. Real partnership expands you, challenges you, makes you better than you'd be alone. What I had with Vivienne made me smaller, quieter, less certain of my own worth. And the saddest part is I didn't even notice it happening. Broken bones heal stronger, they say. I'm not sure that's true, but broken hearts definitely learn better. I learned that sacrifice without reciprocity isn't love. It's exploitation. I learned that loyalty to someone disloyal isn't noble. It's self-destruction. I learned that some people will perform affection flawlessly while planning their exit, and the performance can be so convincing that you'll defend them to yourself even while evidence accumulates. Most importantly, I learned that my worth isn't determined by someone else's capacity to recognize it. Vivian couldn't see my value. That says everything about her vision and nothing about my worth. I spent years trying to be enough for someone who was never going to appreciate what I offered, who measured love in currency and evaluated relationships like investment portfolios. But I am enough. I always was enough. For the right person, just not for her. And that's okay now. It took time. It took therapy. It took sitting alone in an expensive apartment, crying over someone who never really knew me. But eventually, the pain transformed into something else, not bitterness. Not cynicism, wisdom, the hard-won understanding that comes from surviving something you thought would destroy you. I'm not the same person who walked into that office carrying flowers and jewelry and desperate hope. That version of me died that afternoon, but someone else emerged. Someone stronger in the broken places, someone careful but not closed. Someone who understands that vulnerability isn't weakness and that trusting again doesn't mean forgetting what you learned. The lottery ticket still sits in my wallet. I keep it as a reminder that fate operates independent of preparation, that life changes suddenly, violently, without warning or permission. That morning, I was a struggling artist married to someone who didn't value struggle. That afternoon, I became a millionaire who understood exactly how little money matters when standing inside genuine heartbreak. Now, 3 months later, I'm something else entirely, someone rebuilt from wreckage. Someone who knows his worth isn't measured in gallery sales or bank balances or another person's approval. Just a man, broken, healing, human, and finally, Finally, that feels like enough. I finish my coffee, watching sailboats move across the harbor. Somewhere across the city, Vivian is living her separate existence, probably attending fundraisers, probably charming donors, probably performing the graceful competence that makes people forget she's capable of cruelty. I don't hate her anymore. Hatred requires energy I've stopped investing. Instead, I feel something unexpected. Gratitude. She could have waited, could have discovered the lottery win first and stayed strategically, could have given me years more of performance disguised as partnership. But she showed me who she was while thinking I still had nothing, and that accidental honesty might have saved my life. If this story moved you, here's what I need you to do. First, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach people who need to hear it. Second, subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories because I share real stories about real human experiences every single week. Third, and this is the most important one, leave a comment telling me this. Have you ever had something terrible happen that turned out to be exactly what you needed? Share your story. This community is built on honest people supporting each other through life's hardest moments. And finally, share this video with someone who's struggling right now, someone questioning their worth, someone staying in a situation they know is wrong. Sometimes the right story at the right time changes everything. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are always enough. Vivienne didn't destroy me. She freed me. And that's the strangest mercy I've ever received.